Sounds good. And in the meantime, while we are waiting, Bante as well as Venerable Dhammajiva will be leading a 2-day two half-day retreats this coming up weekend. I am sending through the chat information with the registration link as well as Zoom information for all of you to consider.
Yeah, this is actually a Ananda Old Boys Association located mainly in the USA. So they have typically they conduct a session once a year centered in a temple, but this time due to COVID situation they are unable to do that, so they requested us to conduct it remotely. So myself and Bante Dhammajiva are going to conduct it on 24th and 25th. So I think we can start the session. So I welcome all of you for Wednesday Sutta teaching session. So we are discussing suttas here which is more relevant to our practice, and we have already discussed Sabbasava Sutta, which is available in Majjhima Nikaya, which deals with taints, and that is where certain tendencies, latent tendencies available in our mind time to time get activated, and as a result our mind get corrupted, polluted, and we may even go for a kind of a transgression. So we learned how to tackle those latent tendencies in our mind. So that is in the Sabbasava Sutta, and then we took Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta. This is also available in Majjhima Nikaya in the 3rd book, and dealing with elements, Dhatu. As you all know right now that the sutta actually was preached to Venerable Pukkusati, who was a king, and get to know about Buddha's teaching via King Bimbisara, and then he became a monk on the faith of Buddha, and now he is coming in search of Buddha. But on the way he couldn't reach the destination, so he took a small, or rather a potter's house. He approached potter's house and he requested permission to stay there. And Buddha also knew that he is approaching him, he is going to meet him, and so Buddha also went there alone and got the permission from the potter as well as from Venerable Pukkusati to stay at the same place. Now Venerable Pukkusati already had fair amount of competence in the concentration practices, jhana, and so he dwelled fair amount of time during the night in jhana practice, and Buddha too understood that he is still sort of enjoying these blissful states available in jhana. So therefore Buddha didn't go to preach him immediately, and Buddha too get on to another samapatti, another practice, and then he too spent fair amount of time in that practice, and then later both of them emerged from the practice, attainment, and then Buddha asked from Venerable Pukkusati, on behalf of whom that you have gone forth. There Venerable Pukkusati mentioned that he has gone forth on the recluse Gotama, Venerable Gotama, and now he is in search of him. And then Buddha asked whether you can recognize him if you meet him, and then he says, no, I have never seen him. And Buddha didn't go to introduce him, rather he made a request asking, if I preach you some Dhamma, are you ready to receive it? Are you alright to listen to it? Then Venerable Pukkusati says, no problem, I can listen to it, please preach. So far Venerable Pukkusati didn't know about Buddha. Now Buddha is discussing various aspects of his Dhamma, and now we are going to part by part about this sutta. Now, in the first section, Buddha is talking about kind of an explanation of this so-called person, an individual, and he is giving a different interpretation, telling this so-called person is nothing but 6 elements, and then this so-called person is nothing but 6 bases of contact and 18 kinds of mental explorations. Now, we have discussed on these aspects why Buddha is defining like that, and then now we are spending time in the fourth one, that is, the so-called person has 4 foundations. Now, at this moment, actually, Buddha is discussing about a practitioner, not a typical person who is indulged in various day-to-day mundane sensual pleasures, but rather these 4 foundations are much relevant to a practitioner. Now, in these 4 foundations, I will directly get into those foundations now. Buddha starts with the foundation of wisdom, where he is giving a lot of information related to the so-called person. The basic introduction is given with respect to the Dhatu, the elements, and so he is explaining what is 6 elements. First 4 elements actually we are much familiar with: earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. So Buddha discussed them, and again then he get on to the space element. What is space element? And then he introduces consciousness element, that is the 6th element. Now here actually it is not the simple theoretical understanding of these elements that encourage, but rather experiential knowledge about these elements is needed, is required, because this is not something external. These are all related to ourselves. When we consider our whole being, so the physical aspect we can say consists of first 5 elements, that is earth element, water element, fire element, air element, and space element. And on the other hand, the mental aspect consists of the consciousness element. Now, one has to recognize the operation of these elements or the appearance of these elements through one's own practice. So that is the most important thing. So we discussed what are the characteristics of 4 elements particularly. That is, earth element has typically around 6 characteristics, water element has 2 characteristics, air element has 2 characteristics, and the fire element also has 2 characteristics. Using those 2 characteristics, one can recognize the presence of these elements. So whenever, say for example, whenever there is a nature of watery, flowing nature is present, we can decide, okay, there's an abundance of water element present there. When there is heat or cold is present, we can recognize this is the operation of fire element. When there is movement, vibration is available, then we can determine the presence of air element. So likewise, based on the characteristics, we can decide the presence of various elements. Actually, this one has to recognize experientially, not merely through the theory, but rather experientially during one's own meditative practice. One has to recognize them. While, say for example, while you are doing walking meditation, at that time when you feel some heat to your foot, or kind of warmth to your foot, kind of wetness to your foot, or kind of roughness, hardness, stiffness, smoothness, all these helps us to recognize the presence of various elements. And then Buddha get on to tell us about consciousness element. He is taking the feeling aspect of the consciousness element. Because of the consciousness element, vijnana, that we are able to distinguish various feelings. When there is happy feeling, we can recognize that. When there is painful feeling, we can recognize that. When there is neutral feeling, we can recognize that. So with respect to that feeling aspect, feeling tone, Buddha is introducing consciousness element. And then we get on to the other side of this sutta, where Buddha is now taking Venerable Pukkusati towards the Vipassana approach by giving some drawbacks of the typical absorptions, the jhana practice. Basically, as I mentioned before, Venerable Pukkusati already accomplished in jhana. Now Buddha is taking his attention more towards the Vipassana, the wisdom practice, by giving various drawbacks in this jhana practice. And then we get on to the second foundation, that is called the foundation of truth. Now, when one is capable or one is developing the wisdom, so at one moment, as a result of developed wisdom or the matured wisdom, kind of a release of mind can happen. Typically, our mind grasping so many things when we are looking at something. So whatever the pleasurable signs available in the sight being grasped. When we hear something, suppose we are hearing a song, so whatever the pleasurable signs, sounds available in that song is easily or immediately grasped. When we sense something, the same story. When we taste something, the same story, we tend to grasp. So the nature to grasp is something inherent in all beings. Now Buddha is taking us to a kind of a liberation, how to free our mind. So the typical nature of the mind is grasping, holding or clinging. Now Buddha is coming up with various strategies to free our mind. So the Vipassana practice is mainly about educating ourselves and to training the mind to release, to let go, to relinquish. Now in the wisdom foundation, therefore, Buddha is giving enough information to educate the mind, to enlighten the mind, so that what are the disadvantages of this so-called man, woman, etc., and giving a different perspective with respect to the elements or contact, 6 bases of contact. So likewise, Buddha is giving a different approach for us to contemplate, to reflect. So when one practices according to the teaching, so when fair amount of wisdom is available, when the wisdom become available to some extent, the mind temporarily release. So this temporary relinquishment or this temporary freedom one has to recognize. If one miss that, then again and again one has to practice in order to be familiar with this freedom. So this freedom doesn't have any individuality, doesn't have any self, doesn't have any holding, doesn't have any clinging, grasping, but rather it simply have kind of a freedom, kind of an emptiness, kind of a detachment, kind of spaciousness, a simplicity. So those are the aspects of this relinquishment or this release, freedom. So therefore Buddha says in this second truth that one has to preserve it. So during one's own practice, one may time to time encounter this release, this freedom, this spaciousness, this emptiness, and one has to give some value to it, one has to appreciate it, and then one has to preserve it. How to preserve it? So again and again one has to develop the practice. As a result, one's mind get released, and that release state has to be maintained as long as possible. So at the beginning, suppose one's mind is released for 1 minute, then for 2 minutes, then for 5 minutes, then for 10 minutes, then for 15 minutes. Likewise, one is now preserving that release state. So Buddha says, so this release state, this emptiness, this spaciousness, this simplicity is the truth. because it remains as it is without a change. It is not subjected to impermanence or suffering, and there is no self there. And one can therefore trust that. One can therefore use it as a safety reference, as a safety dwelling place. So Buddha therefore encourages us to practice it, be familiar with it, and to preserve it. And then another aspect is mentioned in the third foundation. So that is the foundation of relinquishment. So what is there to relinquish? So those are all the acquisitions so far we have made. So as children we are learning at our college, at our schools, and then we are accumulating so much of knowledge. Then as say adults, we acquire so much wealth, designations, various titles, honorific titles. So likewise we are building up a self. And again through our skills we make a self. I am good in preaching, I am good in teaching, I am good in say singing, I am good in sports, whatever it is. So likewise based on our various skills we can make a self, we can make an individual. So all these acquisitions actually we carry in our head. Wherever we go, we identify ourselves with respect to those acquisitions. And we call them as our identity. So uniquely we can identify ourselves, uniquely we can introduce ourselves based on our biodata, based on our CV. So we are including all our skills, acquisitions, titles, experience, everything to our CV to market ourselves as an individual, as a person, as a special person, as a VIP. So these are all, Buddha says, are the acquisitions. Are we ready to give them up? So we all may be skillful in our practice. We may be able to sit for many hours, walk for several hours, do excellent vipassana practice. But when it comes to the relinquishment, so it becomes a kind of a challenge. Because so far we are making a self, an individual, an important person, a special person. Now all that developed conceptual person has to be let go of. Actually, this is not that difficult if we have a proper understanding about the Dhamma. Because the development of the wisdom helps us to understand the cause and effect relationship. Helps us to understand that there is no self here. What is available are merely elements, or merely 6 bases of contact, or the 5 khandhas. So those information or those experiences helps us to have a better understanding about this so-called person. So as a result, our mind is preparing to give up, to let go of this old wrong norms, all the wrong identifications. So therefore it's a kind of a gradual relinquishment, and therefore Buddha asks us to practice it and to develop it and to cultivate it, because it is not immediately possible to let go of everything. But whenever such possessing thoughts are arising in our mind, whenever such identification arising in our mind, at that very moment we should be vigilant, we should be diligent, and we should let go of that thought. Rather than attributing it to something external, we have to recognize the arising of that deluded thought. And that deluded thought has to be let go of. So this is one of the important aspects in the practice. So typically whenever there is a thought arising, so what we immediately do is to project that thought to something outside. We are attributing it to some external entity, to a person, to a child, to a daughter, to a son, to husband, to wife, to a neighbor, whatever it is. But rather, in the practice, especially in the Chittanupassana, Dhammanupassana, we have to recognize the arising of thoughts internally, in our own mind. So therefore, the practice is introvert. You have to do sort of an introspection rather than looking at outside, projecting the thought into the outside. We have to come back to ourselves. So therefore, a fair amount of humble, honest approach is required. Otherwise, we are always getting deluded, getting conceited, and we will never be able to achieve this. Now, today we can discuss the fourth foundation. So that is called the foundation of peace. So, foundation of peace. So this foundation of peace, upasamaditthano, is something Buddha defines with respect to various defilements. You know, our mind is constantly being bombarded by various sensual desires. So when we see something, immediately kind of a sensual desire may arise, and we want to hold it, we want to possess it, we want to acquire it. If it is a beautiful sound, suppose we want to record it, we want to listen to it again and again. If it is a good fragrance, then we have to have it, we want to apply it to our clothes. So likewise, we want to enjoy the pleasures. So we have that sensual desire. And again, we have various other types of desires. I want to become someone. I want to become a special person. I want to become an arahant. I want to become an enlightened being. I want to become a doctor. I want to become an engineer. I want to become a lawyer. I want to become rich. I want to become beautiful. Whatever it is, we have the desire to become. So we are not satisfied with the way it is right now, and therefore we always want to become someone special, or become, at least to get rid of this present moment, this present status, and to become someone else. So this is kind of a constant desire prevailing in our mind. So these kind of desires has to be recognized, and again it has to be let go of. And here in this foundation of peace, so Buddha encourages us to maintain a mind free from defilements. Are we able to maintain a mind free from lust, free from craving, free from hatred, and free from delusion? Actually, recognizing lust, hatred, craving, those may be easy, but to recognize how our mind get deluded would be little difficult. Now, in certain other suttas, Buddha asks us to contemplate, telling that in this long samsara, constantly our mind being bombarded, our mind being polluted by lust, by greed, by hatred, and by delusion. Say, for example, in the second Gaddulabadda Sutta, Buddha says one should often reflect upon one's own mind. For a long time, this mind has been defiled, has been polluted by lust, hatred, and delusion. Abhikkannang sakanchittang paccavekkittabbang digarattang idan chittang sankilittang ragena dosena mohenati. So it is not only today that our mind get polluted. It is not only today that my mind get lustful. Not only today that I get angry. Not only today I get deluded. But for long samsara, habitually we are being deluded. For long samsara, habitually our mind is constantly subjected to lust, constantly subjected to hatred. So therefore, it's a kind of a difficult task to uproot lust, hatred, and delusion. So that is why we need sort of a practice, sort of a guidance from the Buddha, so to clean our mind. And when we are able to cleanse our mind, So we have to maintain it. We have to maintain that peaceful environment. And again, the cleansing of mind is what is called the proper cleansing of a person. It is not that one can clean one's clothes or have a good bath and then say that I am pure, I am clean. But rather because of the defilements available in the mind that one get defiled. So therefore, in the same sutta, Buddha says, Chitta sankilesa bhikkhave satta sankilissanti, Chitta vodana satta visujjanti. Because of the defilements available in the mind, that one get polluted, one get defiled. And if one is able to purify one's mind, cleanse one's mind, then we can say, okay, he's a pure person. He's a arahant, or a person who is free from any defilements. So therefore, again and again, this purification is really highlighted. And Buddha says in certain other suttas, say for example in Dvaitanupassana Sutta, Buddha says it is the craving that we always accompany. Now sometimes you might think, okay, I have my child to accompany, I have my husband to accompany, I have my wife to accompany, so he is my companion, he is my partner. But Buddha says in this long samsara, our partner is nothing but craving. Tanha dutiyo puriso digamaddhana sansarang. Itta bhava anyata bhavang sansarang nati vattati. So this verse comes in Dvaitanupassana Sutta, where Buddha emphasized telling that we constantly accompany craving, tanha. So we are actually working in order to satisfy craving, in order to satisfy tanha. Suppose you are getting a sensual desire to look at something, look at a film, look at a movie. So that's a kind of a sensual desire risen. Now you are like a slave. Now you are immediately ready to satisfy that sensual desire. Another desire arises to listen to some good music. So immediately you stop all the other tasks and you immediately go to your tape recorder, to your whatever it is, and then you switch on it, and then you are ready to satisfy that desire. And suppose you want to have a delicious food, and so you are immediately taking action to prepare it and to have it, to taste it, so that you can gratify that sensual desire. So likewise, there are many desires available in the mind, and as a result, we are constantly feeding those desires, constantly gratifying those desires. So we are like slaves to gratify our senses, to gratify our desires. So therefore Buddha says, is there a way to stop that? How to be free from desires? How to be free from lust? How to be free from hatred? How to be free from delusion? So this is something that we have to look into. So our practice actually helps us to have a mind which is free from defilements. Time to time we may encounter that. Say for example, you are developing vipassana practice, and as a result you are developing fair amount of wisdom, and at that moment suppose there is no lust, there is no hatred, and the mind is fairly reinforced with the wisdom, so there is no delusion as well. And suppose the mind get freed, now mind has no attachment at all. Then one has to protect it, that is the second foundation. And if there are any attachments, if there are any acquisitions, that also has to be let go of, that is the third foundation. And the last foundation, Buddha says, so this peaceful state, this free state, this undefiled state, one has to train. One has to train again and again. So, in this sutta, in this Dhatu Vibhanga Sutta, Buddha says, Pubbe aviddasuno avijja hoti. Now, previously, because of our ignorance, we constantly associate lust. As I have mentioned in the Gaddula Baddha Sutta, It is not just today that I am allowing the mind to be lustful. It is in long samsara. Mind is subjected to lust. Mind is subjected to hatred. Mind is subjected to delusion. Now, if we understand the gravity of this statement, what Buddha is telling, in this long samsara, constantly our mind get defiled, our mind got polluted because of lust, because of hatred, because of delusion. And therefore it's a kind of a urgency arising in one's mind, how to keep it free, how to keep it pure, kind of a clean mind, kind of a pure mind, free from lust, free from hatred, free from delusion. So this is something that we have to look into. So as I said, during the practice we may encounter such pure states of mind. It is free from lust, free from hatred, and fair amount it is free from delusion as well. At the beginning, suppose you may encounter free from lust and hatred. At that time we have to recognize it, because that state is not that interesting, because we get encouraged when there is some sort of a motivation. This lust, craving actually give us a lot of motivation. Hatred, resentment give us a lot of motivation. It energizes us, agitates the mind, makes us active. So we constantly therefore run after something. Suppose a young person look at another young girl, say for example, young boy looks at another young girl. So because of various attractive features, now the person's mind get deluded, mind get defiled by lust, and now he is motivated to possess the other person, to have a relationship with the other person, to talk with the other person, to offer something to other person, whatever it is. So kind of a motivation is arising in one's mind. Suppose on the other hand, one is belittled by someone else, someone being sort of criticized, a kind of a hatred arises in the other person's mind. So once one is now energized to get a revenge. Now he is trying various methods, various strategies to get the revenge. Now even in today, in the big picture, if we consider, say when China being sort of hinted by US, okay, China is now in a mood to take the revenge. On the other hand, suppose China is making a hint towards the US. Now US is in a mood to get the revenge. So kind of a defilements are operating in any level. It is available in the typical individual level. It may be available in the family level. It may be available in the kind of society level, in a country level, and even in the global level. So these are the defilements actually motivate us, encourage us to have someone, have some person, to make a special person, an important person, important nation, important society, important country, whatever it is. Now, when the mind is free from these defilements, so that state of mind appear fairly boring, not that interesting. So this is where we are missing the place, or we are missing the point. So that is why even at the second foundation, Buddha says, to preserve the truth, to preserve that free state. And similarly here, in the fourth foundation, Buddha says to train that peace. So when one encounters that peaceful state of mind, one has to again and again make it available, make it accessible to oneself. How to make it available, readily available for oneself. So this actually can be done only through one's practice. Even if you learn or listen to a lot of Dhamma sermons, it can give you a lot of encouragement, but you have to be familiarized with this state. So through your own meditative practice, you have to encounter such peaceful state, such undefiled state, and that undefiled state has to be broadened. Say you are able to encounter that for 1 minute. Are you able to maximize it to another 2 minutes? Are you able to maintain it for 3 minutes? Are you able to maintain it for 5 minutes? So likewise, so this peaceful state of mind has to be trained. Rather than ignore it and immediately jump to another pleasurable feeling, another sensual pleasure, another kind of a thought, are you able to preserve that true state? Are you able to train yourself in that undefiled state? So this is where the practice is important. So you have to do it as a practice. It's entirely a practical approach. It is not the kind of a theoretical knowledge necessary. Theoretical knowledge is extremely important, so that's why we are discussing these things. And that theoretical knowledge has to be practically applied during our meditative practice. Now we have actually discussed all 4 foundations, and I am trying to give a kind of a brief summary here. So in these 4 foundations, Buddha says the first foundation, this is the foundation of wisdom, Paññāditthāno. Second foundation is the foundation of truth, Saccāditthāno. The third foundation, that is the foundation of relinquishment, Cāgāditthāno. The fourth foundation is the Upasamāditthāno, the foundation of peace. Now, with respect to Paññā, the wisdom, Buddha emphasized telling that one should not neglect this wisdom. Because this wisdom is entirely different from the typical mundane acquiring of knowledge. You can go to a college, you can go to a university, and you can acquire a lot of knowledge. So those are all worldly knowledges. All help us to make a self. All help us to make an individual, a so-called important person, a special person. But this knowledge, this wisdom, what Buddha teaching us, helps us to relinquish these all delusions. So, more and more one understand the Dhamma, and more wisdom is available for oneself, so it leads us to relinquish all graspings. So one will understand nothing is worthy of grasping. Sabbe Dhamma nalang abhinivesaya. This is another statement available in Dhamma. So Buddha is telling there is nothing worthy of attaching, nothing worthy of clinging. So this is a kind of a very radical statement. Sometimes you as say lay people, you have a lot of important things. Your children, your husband, your wife, your wealth, your bank account, your car, your house, your say designation, occupation, so many worthy things. But when one is developing one's practice, so one may come to a stage, nothing to hold, nothing is worthy of holding. So this does not mean, as I mentioned during the last week, this does not mean that you relinquish, you give up everything and you become a beggar. So that's another extreme. But rather, are we able to have the necessary amount, the essential amount, and keep a mind free from attachment? So this is a challenge. This is where the practice is important. More and more the wisdom is developing, so one will understand this is what is available is a cause and effect relationship. Constantly there are causes and conditions making kind of an experience, and are we able to maintain that experience without polluting our mind, while maintaining a free mind, unattached mind. So that is where Buddha says, so the development of this kind of a wisdom, one has to be work hard. Don't neglect it. Don't postpone it. So be hurried to acquire that wisdom, to develop that wisdom. And the development of that wisdom alone is also not necessary. So that is why another 3 foundations are mentioned here. So once fair amount of wisdom is developed, so mind may experience sort of a freedom, sort of a relinquishment, sort of a spaciousness, sort of an emptiness. So then Buddha says, so try to preserve it, try to maintain it. Try to maintain it at least for 5 minutes. Try to maintain it for 10 minutes. Try to maintain it for 30 minutes. So likewise, one has to preserve that true state of the mind, because everything else is kind of a fallacy. So when one is encountering this true state, appreciate it, give some value to it, and try to preserve it. And why we can't preserve it? Because of the defilements, because of these acquisitions, because of various bonds. So when various thoughts are arising in our mind because of this craving, so at that very moment we have to recognize it. We have to clearly see it. And when one can see it mindfully, one can let go of that thought. As a result, again mind becomes free. As a result, again mind becomes spacious, unattached. So all these 4 foundations are interrelated. Therefore, last time there was a question, why these are sort of arranged in this order? Are they in a different order? Actually, at the beginning, the first foundation, the foundation of wisdom, may be the first foundation that one has to develop. But later on, the other 3 foundations actually help each other. And all 4 foundations are helping each other, contributing each other, reinforcing each other. Say for example, you are able to maintain a free mind. Suppose for 5 minutes, your mind is free. Your mind is spacious. So one can say you are now preserving the truth, the second foundation. At that time, suppose you see something. You are looking at, your eyes are open and you can see something. And immediately, kind of a lust, kind of a greed aroused in the mind. Assume this is a kind of a scenario. Now at that time, now Buddha has given clear instructions. Try to train the mind free from lust. Try to train the mind to keep free from attachment, free from greed. So that is the direction given in number 4. So immediately, so we have to memorize or so to remind that instruction, and then keep the mind again back in the pure state. Bring it back to the undefiled state. So due to certain reasons, certain defilements have arisen, greed has arisen. Now the 4th foundation is telling us, okay, try to train the mind to be free, to maintain an undefiled state. So one has to purify one's mind, to remove that arisen greed, and again bring it back to the undefiled state. And again we can look at it in the with respect to the third foundation. So when lust is arising, it may be sort of hinting some kind of a possession. Okay, I want to have it. I want to have her. I want to have him. I want to hug him. Whatever it is. Embrace him. So all these are sort of acquisitions. Now Buddha is telling, okay, just let go of that acquisition. Let go of that sort of desire. So all these therefore are interrelated. So we can look at the whole practice with respect to these 4 foundations. So that's why I am trying to sort of pictorially show here. So the yogi is sort of supported by all these 4 foundations. So he has the foundation of wisdom, foundation of truth, foundation of relinquishment, and the foundation of peace. So this, when we are again and again practice this scenario, it is actually the development of Noble Eightfold Path. So the practice of whole Noble Eightfold Path is actually very beautifully capsulated here. So this is a different way of Buddha's teaching. Now Buddha sometimes teach about the 4 noble truths, and here Buddha is teaching us with respect to the 4 foundations. Those are also very beautiful. What is the foundation of wisdom? What is the foundation of truth? What is the foundation of relinquishment? And what is the foundation of peace? So more and more, if one is able to establish oneself in these 4 foundations, then the mind has to be free. Mind has to be peaceful. Mind has to associate the truth, the true state, and it is fairly reinforced by some deep knowledge, some deep wisdom. So therefore it is a kind of a very dynamic state. It is not kind of a lethargic, passive state. It is a very rich state of mind. So that is why when someone is talking about emptiness, it is not a kind of a passive state. It is a very rich, very encouraged, and so peaceful, and again reinforced by wisdom and well established in truth, and all the typical worldly acquisitions are all let go of, and a kind of a pure state of mind. So this is how Buddha is explaining to this Venerable Pukkusati, and only another section is available in this sutta. I hope to cover that on next week. And with that, I like to wind up today's session. Now I open the session for questions.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. For any new participants to this discourse, you can feel free to raise your hand to ask the question directly, or you may send it to anonymously. So, Bhante, the first question. Dear Bhante, could you please explain in Foundation of Peace how someone can get rid of a craving or desire with an example step by step?
Yeah, okay. Now say for example, there are many approaches available. So if one is in early stages of one's practice, so one's mindfulness and wisdom and concentration is not yet developed. Say for example, you have a lustful thought. So at that time, if you simply be mindful about that lustful thought, so it may not be sufficient enough to remove it. So even as a result of your awareness, it might even grow, because still the mindfulness is not yet powerful enough. So at that time, suppose you do some Asubha practice, contemplating about 32 parts of the body and understanding the loathsomeness of the body. So those are some mundane, or those are some another practices available till our mind is fairly strong enough. At that time, okay, you develop Asubha practice and you are able to release the mind from lust. Suppose again mind become say angry. At that time, if you practice mindfulness, if your mindfulness is not yet developed, so that awareness, that mindfulness might not be enough to push it away or to let it go. So therefore at that time probably you can practice metta meditation, loving kindness, so that again the mind become free, again mind become neutral. So therefore, as two antidotes, you can have Asubha practice and the metta practice at our early stages. Now when one is developing mindfulness, okay, you do Anapanasati meditation, you do say rising and falling, you do walking meditation, etc., so that your mindfulness is uplifted, again developed. So you are now aware, okay, at this moment I am mindful, at another moment I am not that mindful. So likewise you are trying to maintain some continuous mindfulness, you are developing mindfulness. And again you are recognizing, okay, at this given moment my mind does not distract, it can stay well concentrated on a given subject, given kind of an object. So likewise, so one recognize what is concentration, what is mindfulness. And now one has to develop wisdom by recognizing the behavior of each and every various phenomena. Say you are observing a certain feeling. So as a result, so you understand how this feeling behave, how it is arising, how it is changing, how it is kind of an accumulation of various feelings. It is not just a one single feeling, it's an accumulation of so many feelings, and they are all very transient, and it is constantly arising and passing away. So likewise, so you sort of develop fair amount of wisdom. Now this is the Vipassana practice. So one is developing. So at that time you have fair amount of mindfulness. At that time you have fair amount of clarity of mind, concentration, as well as a fair amount of wisdom is available. Suppose at this stage there is lust arising in the mind. Now you can simply be aware of that lust. Since you have already developed fair amount of mindfulness using Kayanupassana, using Vedananupassana, now when lust is arising in the mind, so immediately you are aware of that. Unknowingly it cannot arise because you are now developed fair amount of mindfulness and fair amount of clarity of mind is available. So when lust is arising, you are knowing that. So now you can be aware of that lust. You can turn your attention towards that lust. Not to the lustful object, but to the lustful thought. Now when you are being mindful about that lustful thought, when you clearly recognize this is a lustful thought, this is lust, then that lust is not encouraged. You are not carried away by lust. You are not attributing it to an external object, external person. Rather, you clearly recognize this is a lustful thought. So that recognition helps us to cut off that delusion. And as a result, this lustful thought cannot grow and it will fade away. Suppose there is a hatred arising in the mind, anger arising in the mind. Similarly, you can be aware of that anger. The mindfulness helps us to clearly recognize it, and now you can turn your attention towards that angry thought, and as a result you are not feeding that anger. As a result, anger will fade away, anger will disappear. So likewise, when the mindfulness is developed, concentration is developed, fair amount of wisdom is developed, so you don't need lot of practice, but rather that develop mindfulness, develop concentration and develop wisdom helps us to have a kind of a protection to our mind. So when various defilements are arising, at their very early stages we can recognize. They may not go to the obsessive levels, but rather at their very early stages one can recognize. So one can pay one's attention towards those defilements, and as a result we are not feeding them, we are not becoming a victim to those defilements, and as a result those defilements will fade away. So these are the various approaches one can utilize to remove various defilements. Actually these are not the only approaches, only strategies. There are many other strategies are available, but typical familiar approaches are these ones. When you are not yet mindful, not yet have developed mindfulness, you can use loving kindness, metta, this asubha and various other practices. But later, when fair amount of wisdom and vipassana practice is developed, so that knowledge, that wisdom, that mindfulness is fairly capable of removing the defilements.
Thank you, Bhante. And the next question. In order to develop mastery on Upassana peace, I feel the constant practice of Citta Nupassana and Dhamma Nupassana is important. If not, I feel peace or Upassana will be confined only to formal meditation sessions. Am I correct?
Can you repeat the last statement?
So the last statement is if not, I feel peace or Upassana will be confined only to formal meditation sessions. And this is in reference to if this person does not practice Citta Nupassana and Dhamma Nupassana, then this peace seems to be only available during formal meditation sessions. Is this correct?
Yeah, basically, I mean, at the beginning you have formal meditation sessions. Okay, you have some selected time. At this time I do my sitting practice. At this time I do my walking practice. So likewise, you have a schedule. This is how we start. But slowly, as we continue our practice, so we have to pervade the practice. We have to sort of enhance our practice, develop our practice, so that it is available even in day-to-day activities. That is where the sati sampajanya, the clear comprehension is there, where you are trying to apply mindfulness to your daily activities. While driving, you can be mindful. While say talking with another person, one can be mindful. While brushing your teeth, one can be mindful. While eating, while bathing, whatever the activity that you are getting involved with, so you can be mindful. Now this is how we are developing the practice. Now your practice is not limited to that scheduled 2 hours, but rather you are behaving in a way to contribute towards the practice. So you are enhancing your practice. You are spreading your practice among all the day-to-day activities. Now, suppose you are getting to the fairly another advanced stage of practice, that is, suppose you can now look at the mind, as you have correctly mentioned. Now you are getting to the Chittanupassana. Now you are looking at the mind, you are observing the mind. So at this observation, you can understand whenever there is a lustful thought arising in the mind, when there is a anger arising in the mind, when again mind is getting deluded, one can be aware. So this Chittanupassana is not limited to your sitting practice, not limited to your walking practice, but rather you have to be skillful to apply it throughout the day. Whenever you are awakened, you have to have some guard about the mind. So at the very moment when you wake up, you have to have another thread running to observe the mind. So kind of another little process is running to observe the mind. You may engage with various other activities, doesn't matter. But at the same time, you are watching how mind is reacting. Say for example, you are talking with someone. At that time, how the mind is reacting. Are you getting to anger? Are you getting frustrated? Are you being belittled? Are you being praised? Are you conceit arising? So likewise, you are having kind of a awareness about one's own mind, even while you engage in one's practice. Engage in various other activities, daily activities. So this is how you are recognizing various defilements. And later you will understand these defilements may not arise even during the scheduled time. Say you are now going to the your sitting session. You have some sitting session from 5 to 6. Now you get into your cushion and then you sit, expecting defilements to arise. But defilements may not arise because you are so ready to the state, your mind is so vigilant, so no defilements may appear. But on the other hand, you may engage with various other daily activities. At that time, many defilements can arise. So therefore, you can't now restrict your practice only to the scheduled meditation time, but rather you have to be vigilant throughout the day. You have to look after your mind throughout the day. You have to guard the mind throughout the day. Then only you can recognize various defilements, how they are arising, how they are tempting you, how they are trying to pollute the mind. So this is how we have to expand our practice. So therefore, don't limit your practice only to the scheduled time, but try to enhance it. Try to combine it to your life. Then we can say it's a kind of a lifelong practice.
Thank you, Bhante. The next question. Sir, do you mean self is a result of acquisitions and also a result of cause and effect?
And we can say like this. Actually, when Buddha is defining Paticcasamuppada, avijja paccaya sankhara, sankhara paccaya vijnanam, vijnana paccaya nama rupam, etc. So this is how he is explaining us how a self can be arisen causally. Because of various causes, a self-view can arise. So there are various causes. Avijja, ignorance is there. Due to ignorance, we do various formations. We do various creations, preparations. Now the mind or the consciousness go and establish on name and form, nama rupa. Now as a result, we start to operate. We use our mouth, we use our eyes, we use our ears. The salayatana, the 6 sense bases are now in operation. Now the passa, the contact arise. Now the feelings arise. Now those feelings, if they are very pleasurable, then we are trying to acquire them. We are now going to hold them, possess them. Now the craving arise. Now we go and grasp. So it's a kind of a causal relationship is there, cause and effect relationship is there. As a result, kind of a self, a person, individual can arise. So therefore Buddha has taught us how a self view can arise as a ignorant mind. When the ignorance is predominant, when the other causes come into effect. And as a cause and effect relationship, therefore a self view can arise. And actually the possessions, the acquisitions, all are part and parcel of this whole story. Actually, for the clarity of teaching, Buddha is looking at it in various angles and teaching us. But they are really interrelated. And as I mentioned, the 4 foundations are interrelated. Similarly, the acquisitions and the defilements and the ignorance, the cause and effect relations, all are interrelated. Now, when Buddha is teaching us, we can look at in various angles and we can recognize, we can clearly understand, okay, at this level, the cause and effect relationship is available. At this time, the more possessiveness is available. At this time, more delusion is available. So you can have some clarity of how things are happening. So you are actually, when you are observing the mind, so various these kind of revelations can happen. You may understand how mind become ignorant, how mind get entangled, how mind get deluded. So it's a kind of a self-observation. So I can say yes to your answer that the self-view is arising, a self is arising due to the causes.
Thank you, Bhante. And the last question, from what you said last time, renunciation comes to us gradually with practice. This seems to be a very slow process. If this is so, could you please explain how one can use restraint to complement the gradual renunciation? How much restraint is healthy? I ask this because as a layperson in practice, there are many things that we do in daily life, such as having tasty food, listening to music, or watching a movie, etc., that will keep us bound in samsara.
Yeah, true. So when we are using our senses, if we guard them, so then less possibility of arising of defilements. It is not a big thing to understand. It is not a difficult thing to understand. Suppose you are watching too many movies. Suppose they all have a lot of excitement, lot of lustful, scenes. So again and again, lust may going to arise in your mind. Again and again, mind get agitated. So you are encouraging defilements. It's not difficult to understand. Suppose you are listening to a lot of noisy music, a lot of jazz and disco and whatever it is. Now again and again, a lot of desires are arising in the mind. So, I mean, it is as you have mentioned, it is not immediately possible to give up everything and come to a monastery and become a monk. But rather, it's a kind of a gradual relinquishment where, say, you are refining the mind. Say, for example, when the mind is gross, when the mind is rough, you need very gross music to be happy. You need very gross sensual pleasures to make yourself happy. But when there's a refinement happens in the mind, when there is mindfulness available, then you, even with some subtle activities you can be happy. Say even kind of a bird chirping, you can make you happy. And kind of a little noise, little sound can make you happy. Even a kind of a cool breeze can make you happy. Kind of a sunset can make you happy. Whatever it is, I mean, even that kind of a less harmful things can make you happy. So likewise, you are slowly coming to a kind of a refinement of the mind. So that is why, I mean, the whole Buddha's teaching helps us to go from rough state to a refined state, from gross state to a refined state. And as you dwell in that refined state, so then that refined state appear like gross, appear like rough. And then you are gradually moving to a further refined state, more refined state, and you dwell there. And as you are dwelling there, then that refined state appear like gross, because it is appear like rough. Now you are getting to another more and more refined state. So this is how actually we have to practice. Now, say for example, even in the samatha practice, suppose one is get on to the first jhana, and when one is associating it for a long time, then he will understand there are certain drawbacks, defects in first jhana. Then he relinquishes first jhana and get into more refined second jhana. And now he is dwelling in the second jhana, and it appear like more refined. And more one associate that, then he will understand, okay, this is still gross. This still has many defects. Now he is getting to the third jhana, it is more refined. Similarly, if you take the vipassana approach, at the beginning, say you develop some mindfulness and some awareness, some concentration, and as a result you will understand, okay, certain activities, what I am doing is not suitable to me. It is encouraging defilements. It is destroying the peace in the mind. So we'll understand. So as a result, you stop those harmful activities. So you stop certain associations with certain people, because you understand they are sort of destroying the peace in the mind. So now you are sort of restrained yourself. Now you restrained and you are continuing your practice. After you reach another state, you will understand, okay, still there are certain other activities that are not essential to me and that still contributing towards the agitation of the mind, so I can let go of those activities as well. So likewise, you are sort of developing yourself gradually with respect to the state of mind. So don't worry, don't be in a hurry, and don't get discouraged. Don't be afraid thinking that I have to let go of everything. The mind will tell you, the mindfulness will tell you the right time. Till you become mature enough, you don't need to let go of even. Actually, don't try to forcefully let go of. Don't try to forcefully relinquish things. When your mind is ready, it will be automatic. You will easily, with a smile, you can let go of when your mind is ready. So therefore, it's a matter of continuing your practice, daily practice, and it will slowly lead you to the happiness.
Thank you, Bhante. That's all of the questions for today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So some of you have good questions, and this lesson is actually very related to our practice. And now I think we have spent around 8 days discussing this same sutta. I think we can wind it up on next week. That is the last section available in, and that is also quite interesting. And with that hope, I'll wind up the session, and we'll recite the traditional verses to share the merits. Ettavatacha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavatacha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Ettavatacha amhehi sambatang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya. Akasatthacha bummattha devanaga mahiddika punyantang anumoditta chirang rakhantu sasanang ආකාසට්ඨා ච බුම්මට්ඨා දේවානාගා මහිද්దికා පුඤ්ඤන්තං අනුමෝදිත්වා චිරං රක්ඛන්තු දේශනං ආකාසට්ඨා ච බුම්මට්ඨා දේවානාගා මහිද්దికා පුඤ්ඤන්තං අනුමෝදිත්වා චිරං රක්ඛන්තු මම් පරං ඉදං වෝ ඥාතිනං හෝතු සුඛිතා හුන්තු ඥාතයෝ ඉදං වෝ ඥාතිනං හෝතු සුඛිතා හුන්තු ඥාතයෝ ඉදං වෝ ඥාතිනං හෝතු සුඛිතා හුන්තු ඥාතයෝ ඉමිනා පුඤ්ඤ කම්මේන මාමේ බාල සමාගමෝ සතං සමාගමෝ හෝතු යාව නිබ්බාන පත්තියා ඉමිනා පුඤ්ඤ කම්මේන මාමේ බාල සමාගමෝ සතං සමාගමෝ හෝතු යාව නිබ්බාන පත්තියා ඉමිනා පුඤ්ඤ කම්මේන මාමේ බාල සමාගමෝ සතං සමාගමෝ හෝතු යාව නිබ්බාන පත්තියා සාදු සාදු සාදු